I am now a free speech absolutist, was the rallying cry of the left over the previous weekend just gone. So for those of you who weren't aware, we covered this yesterday. Gary Lineker currently runs Britain because it turns out that if he can just say whatever he wants without consequences with the BBC, because the BBC decided to change their guidelines on how they deal with political opinions from their presenters, despite the fact that they are supposed to be an impartial organisation. There is no such thing, of course, but that's what they pretended to be, and now that's just gone out of the window. Let's not pretend anymore. We are a very partial organisation, and our presenters are allowed to just insult massive swaths of our audience, those people who pay the licence fee and pay their bills at the end of each month, because Gary Lineker gets paid, I think, from that segment that Carl did yesterday talking about it, was £1.35 million a year, and that was a pay cut. That was a pay cut from £1.75 million per year, so they could close up that gender pay gap. He's still the most highly paid person in the BBC, of course. So Gary Lineker runs the world, and it was amusing just to see how many people became free speech warriors while this whole situation was going down. We do also have a recent contemplations that Josh and I did over the weekend that I would like to plug for everybody. You should go and watch it. We were talking about how corporations exploit ordinary people. Now, this was a particularly difficult one for Josh to go through, being a libertarian, but we do all have major complaints about how corporations work, and we also gave a few anecdotes throughout this, sprinkled throughout, of our previous experiences working in corporations, primarily my experiences working in call centres for complaints, where I was basically made to do, and sadly was very good at, doing some pretty shady things just to make sure that the corporation got its way at all times. And happily, the comments, as I was hoping, are just mainly people moaning about times they've been screwed by big business. So please go and watch that, and you can join in all the fun in the comments underneath as well. Have you ever been screwed by big business, Callum? You probably have at some point.
EA stole 20 quid off me once. I'm still salty.
Really? Did they?
Yeah.
What for?
Well, I purchased a game, got a refund. They just didn't refund the money.
Fun.
Still mad.
Anyway, so for a long time, we've known that the left do not care about free speech, and in fact, generally speaking, it's only the centre-right that has actually cared about any sort of principled stance on free speech, which has had its positives and negatives, shall we say, as time has gone on, mainly because of the fact that being that the centre-right and people on the right aren't the ones in charge, they don't get to implement their principled stances and instead get proscribed and censored wherever they go, including social media, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, wherever you go, Spotify, there will be somebody telling you, no, you can't say that, you're a very naughty boy. And the left has not been particularly quiet about this. They've been trying to rub it in everybody's faces that we are in charge for a long time, and anybody who says, hey, my speech is being censored, even though I've not said anything that could be considered outside the realm of free speech, that being, incitement to violence or anything like that, has been censored, they've come out with articles like this. And I thought we would go through some examples of what the left were saying about free speech, and then we'll see what they ended up saying about free speech over the past few days. So this one was wonderful. Let's just take a look at this headline: The Free Speech Panic, How the Right Concocted a Crisis. That's right, it's just the right. Do you remember the right? We all just got together one day and we said, hey, let's censor ourselves so we've got something to moan about.
It was a good plan.
It was an excellent plan. And now we're here taking your money. It all comes together, eh?
No, it was almost like the left were awful.
Yes,
I just
every
love the
single
idea
time.
that they've never done anything bad. I mean, that's actually how they think.
They haven't.
But I mean, it would be. I think the fascists, like when you talk to neo-Nazis or white supremacists, they will tell you, yeah, I mean, we did some bad stuff, and then they'll try and justify it. But the leftists will just be like, didn't do it.
The kulaks were asking for it, bro.
Like, if you want actual denialism of reality,
obviously the kulaks, the Holodomor never happened. But if it did happen, they were asking for
we'll do it better next time.
Yeah, exactly. We didn't cut out all the kulaks. That was the real mistake we made, says the left. The next one, here's a fun one from 2019. The myth of the free speech crisis. I love just the level of gaslighting that goes on here. I feel like I've been beaten over the face by an abusive spouse, and they just keep saying, no, it was the door frame, dear. It was the door frame. You've got to look where you're going next time. It's the myth of the abusive spouse. And in this one, it says brilliantly, no, just go back to it. It's the same article. The myth of the free speech crisis is an extension of the political correctness myth. Because political correctness, that never happened either. All the complaining in the 90s, that was just conservative Christian evangelicals. Nothing ever happened to do with political correctness.
Are you calling political correctness itself a myth?
Oh no, I know,
I mean,
it's brilliant.
But to say that,
I've seen
you're
so
saying
many.
that there is nothing that's undiscussable within political life. Of course there is. In every society, there's something undiscussable.
And I've seen plenty of people on the left defending political correctness and saying, obviously, it's just having manners, isn't it? It's just having manners. But apparently, it's a myth, according to this
Utter
article.
madness. I think because you got to remember, like, political correctness depends on the country you're in. Because, like, to say the things that we can't say in the West, right? If you say them in North Korea, no one's going to give a crap. But if you talk bad about Kim Jong Un, like, that's political correctness. Like, you're not allowed to do that. To say it's just manners. To say that he never goes to the bathroom.
And there are literally certain subjects are completely censored and against the law in Germany, to the point where many people on Twitter get notifications when they post particular things, saying little notifications saying Germany is not letting you say this.
We have acquired to tell you.
Okay, I mean, I don't care about the German audience. Sorry for any Germans who might be watching this right now. But if Germany doesn't want me saying certain things on Twitter, oh well, I can live with that. It carries on, but it's a recent mutation, more specifically linked to efforts or impulses to normalize hate speech or shut down legitimate responses to it. There we go. That's been the stock response by the left for so long. Whenever anybody on the right or the center or anywhere who isn't just a massive leftist just says, let's just freedom of speech, yeah, but not freedom of consequences. Duh. That's been the stock
You know
response.
what's doubly funny? The author here is Nesreen Malik. And I
Oh, yeah.
don't know if you know anything about it. She's from North Sudan. And she wrote a column once talking about the fact that her family used to call the South Sudanese the M-word because they were darker than the North
Oh, she was
Sudanese.
that person.
Yeah, and they were disgusted by them and blah, blah, blah. It was like horrifically racist stuff. And then she moved to Saudi Arabia and all the Arabs called her the N-word. And then she was like, hang on a minute. Racism might be bad. It's like,
It's funny
really,
how
Nesreen?
it's funny how people's political positions shift depending if they're on top or on bottom, isn't it?
It was entirely her article. That was
Oh
it.
yeah, no surprise there. There was this wonderful article that came out I think last year, in fact, that just the headline says it all. Do you want free speech to thrive? Then it has to be regulated, and regulated by me. Damn it, is the implication that always happens.
The only way to save your husband is to shoot him, missus.
And then there was this one which was relevant to the beginning of last year, which was talking about Neil Young's battle with Spotify. Do you remember this when it was going on? I think we covered it
Yeah.
together when
Weirdo.
Neil Young, who was a classic rock folk artist from the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, he did not Rockin' Around the World. That was that band whose name I can't remember. No, he did Rockin' in the Free World. He had a speech called the 2006 Freedom of Speech Tour, but when it comes to Joe Rogan questioning certain narratives around certain drugs that were released over the past few years, shall we say, to get around YouTube, then that meant that he had to have Spotify make misinformation laws and rules applied to the platform, or else Neil Young's going to take all his songs and he's going to go home. So Spotify let Neil Young take all his songs and go home. I think there's still only like 2 Neil Young songs on the platform, and honestly, it's
never
the
been the
better
same.
platform for so.
It's unbearable, you Spotify now.
I know, I can't. If I can't get me Young, what's the point of it? You know, it's absolutely rubbish. But free speech is when I'm protesting things I don't like, and this isn't necessarily just something that happens on the left as well. It's particularly apparent on the left over the past few years. Free speech is when it's things that we don't like. Is when Gary Lineker calls Tories Nazis. That's free speech. But if it's saying, hey, aren't we accepting a few too many migrants into the country, especially when they're illegal migrants who don't have any right and they just come in here and immediately claim asylum and then get loads of benefits and they get put up in a hotel, etc., etc.
That's anti-speech.
Yes, that's anti-speech. That's you just sucking the air back in. That's like that. That's not real speech. That you need to face some consequences for that.
Speech.
But that's just how these things work, and it's always worked with the left. I think when we originally covered this story, like over a year ago at this point, I probably made the mistake, I've not gone back and watched it, but I probably made the mistake of assuming somewhat good faith on Neil Young's part and just assumed that he's an idiot. No.
I think you did.
Yeah. No, this is not just incompetence or stupidity. This is a tactic that the left has used for the past 60 years, where when they're not in power, it's free speech. And then when they are in power, you're hateful, you're talking hate speech, that's not free speech, therefore we should censor it. And this is a brilliant example. So let's move on. So this is where free speech all of a sudden matters. Mirror Politics. The Mirror, for those who don't know, is a left-wing British newspaper, saying talking about Gary Lineker, the broadcaster should have stood up to this baying mob of right-wing MPs and defended free speech. We care now. We care now. We've realised the errors of our ways. No, wait, no, there weren't any errors of our ways. It's just that we're right. That's always the case. And here's the next one from this person. Josh shared this with us. Priyam Vada Gopal. Who's that person?
Do you remember her?
No, I don't remember her. Remind me.
She was a professor at the University of Oxford and said that white people don't count as people, and was then promoted.
She's one of those ones, presumably to like post-colonial studies in Oxford, I'd imagine.
It was white lives don't matter as white lives was the nugget of knowledge she gave to the world.
Okay, all right. Well, I know that the 4chan White Lives Matter meme has actually been proscribed as hate speech by, I think, the ADL and the SPLC now, and I know, which is just amazing. And I think, I don't know if this is entirely correct, but I think 4chan are now working on getting them to proscribe the sentence "white people deserve to live" as hate speech.
I mean, good luck to them.
I think they will. I think they will succeed. I can't wait to see when that gets.
White people have civil rights too. I think that's
white people are people. White people are human. All these ones, ADL will just
please
be,
don't
nope,
murder us.
nope. Please don't murder us. Definitely not. So that's always funny. But Priyam Vada saying we don't mean everyone's free speech, pointing out that the Free Speech Union didn't come to the defense of Gary Lineker, a man who probably hates the existence of the Free Speech Union.
I think they did actually defend her. I don't know why she's thinking they didn't.
Well, it was a stupid move for them because Josh, if you scroll down, actually had a brilliant response to this, which can be summed up in this first sentence. Defending the rights of someone who would not do the same in return is a self-defeating political strategy. Very well put, Josh. Very well put, Josh. I hope he heard that.
Is that a favour?
No, that wasn't a favour. That was me genuinely complimenting him because it's just
I
true.
thought you'd upset him at lunch or something.
No, it's the equivalent of that stone toss meme where they're on their knees with their hands behind their backs. But if we use the power of the government, it could be used against us, and it zooms out and they've got the gun against their head already. It's that kind of vibe where it's, well, if I'm going to defend your right to screw me over, then you're just going to screw me over. So that's a pretty stupid thing for me to do. And we've got people pointing out the obvious. We've got this person, this dung beetle, John O'Connell, who has been a little bit of a pain in our side on Twitter every so often, so I just like to call him out, saying, perennial underachiever, Toby Young's Free Speech Union stubbornly silent on Gary Lineker's freedom of speech. Speech Union have always been selective on cases they highlight, i.e. only the ones they agree with.
No, it's about if you're a member of the union.
That also helps.
It's really how unions work. You can retard.
Yes, also, I think one of the important things to highlight throughout this story is that this is not a case of free speech. This is not a case of someone being proscribed from the public sphere. This is a case of an incredibly high-profile presenter.
Should you be allowed to work for state media? Should the public be subsidizing this individual?
Exactly, that's the question. But no, for the left, all of a sudden, we care about free speech now. We care about free speech. And it's really just telling how much they will twist it around, twist all the narratives around so that they will always be right. And when we get to the end, I will give you possibly one of the most hilariously shocking examples of that I have seen. It will involve, sadly, a few sentences from James O'Brien. So I'm sorry if you do want to turn away from the screen when this happens.
Cyanide?
No, those are just earbuds. Although if you eat enough of them, you might die. So you can give it a try in the next 5 to 6 minutes while we go on. We've got a case in point of this man John O'Connell deciding when it is or isn't free speech for himself, which is UKIP's Count Dankula can't find a job. The price you pay for hatred. What happened to Count's free speech? Dank had the right to free speech, didn't he?
Okay, the Gary Lineker doesn't deserve a job.
No.
Is that what you're...
I mean, I agree that Gary Lineker doesn't deserve a job.
Well, yeah,
I think he's an idiot.
There's no even attempt.
I think it would be a public service to defend the public from the absolute... You know in Futurama, those brain slugs? Gary Lineker is the human equivalent of the brain slug. He leeches intelligence from the public by being exposed to him. So I think it would be a public service to just... No. You're not allowed on television anymore.
It's dangerous to the viewer's health.
It is. If he ever appears on screen, what we do is we've just put a black dot where his face is so we don't subject you to that. And the next one, we've got biggest brain in the room, Femi, decides to get involved in this. Do not let Piers Morgan pretend he cares about free speech regarding Gary Lineker. He only cares about free speech when it suits him. I love these arguments. I love these arguments. These are the arguments that you and I have experienced, have been saying for so long. You only care about free speech when it suits you, and when it isn't, it's hate speech. Now we're getting those same arguments. It's good to hear that the leftists have at least been paying attention to the arguments, seeing as they can just throw them straight back at us. But sadly, we're not the ones in charge of the television networks and everything else. When I asked him to oppose anti-protest laws, he unfollowed me. When I asked again, he blocked me. Piers Morgan is an opportunistic hypocrite, and while Femi is not a person I admire or think is intelligent in any sense, he is at least right on that last bit. Because Morgan is a bit of an opportunistic hypocrite.
Yeah, of course.
And I will say that being blocked by Piers Morgan is actually probably the best outcome for such a situation. And an example of Piers Morgan being an idiot, he did a recent talk segment talking about free speech means hearing opinions you dislike as much as the ones you support. Piers, this is not a free speech issue. Why are you defending Gary Lineker, a man who in all likelihood despises you? This is a very stupid thing to do. And he had a follow-up tweet talking about this.
Because they're in the same club, really.
Well, realistically, that is why. Yeah. Piers Morgan, of course, he's been kicked off of the main club, but he's still waiting in the wings, hoping that if he can do and say the right thing, that they'll invite him back on.
Rich British elite Londoners.
Yeah, don't listen to a single thing that they say. They are completely insincere. Gary Lineker should tell the BBC to go F themselves, as I told ITV over the Markle debacle.
I agree. He should then go and find a job outside of the state job he had.
Yeah, free speech is the cornerstone of democracy. And how's democracy working out for you, Piers? And if we look at the democratic opinion of the people underneath in the thread, now if we go... you can see some of these comments. The first comment just kind of sums up the public reaction to him. Impartiality, Piers. Many normal folk lose their jobs over social media comments, so Mr. Lineker shouldn't be any different. No, that wasn't the one, actually. If you keep scrolling, I saw one that really summed up like the leftist opinion. Here we go. He was standing up for the most vulnerable. You were moaning about a girl who turned you down. Not quite the same caliber. This is the response that you should always expect from leftists when you interact with them on free speech. There will be some cutoff point where you have stepped over the line and they haven't. And that's the only thing that they will care about, because this whole thing is about friend and enemy. If you are not friend, then you are enemy. Free speech does not apply to you because to them you are not a human being. Okay, so Piers, if you want to be intelligent, I know this is going to be very difficult, but I know that you want to be, you need to learn and internalize these things.
I mean, this is why I think Jacob Rees-Mogg's response was the best and most sensible one, which is, I'm sick of having this conversation every couple of months about some BBC presenter who's decided to turn around and say all right-wingers are Nazis. Happens every couple of months, you know, this story.
Of course it does.
Just defund the BBC.
Defund the BBC because we know that the people in charge of it and running it and presenting it despise us.
Like, you can have your stupid thing where you sit around and be leftist morons, but on your own network that nobody watches, instead of, like, leeching off the taxpayer.
That would be nice. But leech is going to leech. Speaking of leeches, Angela Rayner had this to say: the BBC's cowardly decision to take Gary Lineker off air is an assault on free speech in the face of political pressure from Tory politicians. They should rethink. And this seems to be the canned Labour response to this, because if we go to the next one, we can see somebody else tweeting about this is just the Labour response, cowardly decision, blah, 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 free speech, Tory politicians, they should get sacked and blah, 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 blah. But what is the typical Labour position on free speech? Well, I've got an old Angela Rayner tweet to exemplify that from 2021. Instead of feeding our kids and funding catch-up programs in schools, the Educational Secretary, Gavin Williamson, is inventing a pointless culture war over free speech at universities. He is protecting Holocaust deniers and doing nothing to improve education. There's that line again. There's that line. I will always have an excuse for why it's free speech for me, but not for thee. So you are right. This shouldn't be a topic of discussion anymore because we know the leftist position on it. Yeah. I just think it's really beautiful to see it just in action, that the left do not care about principles. They have never cared about principles. It's only ever really been the centre-right that really care about these principles, and that's kind of been to their detriment to a certain extent. It's nice to have principles and you want to stand by them, but if those principles only ever lead to you defending your enemies while they've got a gun to your head, they're not really that useful, as far as I can see. Certainly not for the time being.
You didn't end up with a gun to your head, so... Nice job.
Yeah, exactly. And then possibly the most amusing one in all of this was Carol Vorderman. Carol Vorderman, for those of you in the American viewership, you may not be aware of who she is, but then again, you might be. I think, was she on Countdown? Was that it?
Yep.
She was the woman on Countdown for a long time who was basically there to stand there and look pretty and pretend like she knew things. And here we have another example of her not looking as pretty, but still pretending to know things, where she says this inspirational line here: "I'm at BBC HQ in London, where there is a statue of George Orwell, and his words, if liberty means anything at all, it means the right to tell people what they do not want to hear. Watch the video. I stand with Gary." I love that the left has now decided, no, we get to invoke Orwell. We're the ones that get to invoke him. This is just like, if Gary Neville can't go on the BBC, flip off the audience and call them Nazis, this is literally 1984.
Yeah,
It's
no.
beautiful.
If you want liberty, don't work for the state.
No, of course not.
Set up your own media organization.
And this is a nice segue onto the final link that I have, which was this: the most shockingly hilarious about-face I've ever seen, because we've covered recently the Telegraph coming out with all the headlines talking about the Matt Hancock leaked text messages showing that the government knew and were doing everything that we said that they were doing over the past 3 years throughout lockdowns. And it seems that this information has finally got to LBC, Carol Vorderman, and James O'Brien. And if this isn't the perfect example of leftists having no principles, having an incredibly short-term memory, and not wanting to stand by anything that they said and turning around and saying, no, you were evil this whole time, then this is it. Let's just play this whole clip, and I'll just let it sink in for all of you folks.
I think there was a psychological shift, which was we must be obedient. And we have never had that in our psyche for the last 100 years.
Right.
So it was that. It was almost like going back to the First World War.
Yeah.
And you will be told, and it wasn't just for a week. It went on for 2 years, really.
But
every night we would see Posh Boy,
that's it, isn't
there,
it? Yeah.
speaking in a very Churchillian manner. We had no idea what was going on behind closed doors. You had Sunak, the accountant, to his side, and yet then you had a scientist.
Yeah.
And it was all, stay at home, save the NHS. I can't remember with the three things, wear a mask, save the NHS. It was all about saving the NHS. Flipping heck.
Yeah.
And I think it went deep into our psychosis because we were so, I was, upset. I didn't see my daughter for ages because she was in Cambridge at the time. My son lives with me. And I, obviously, like everybody else, you didn't see your friends, you didn't see your rest of your family, all of that. And it was such a trauma.
Yeah.
And I think it's taken us, and then it was, you allowed 4 people outside the pub if you're in Wales, but you're allowed 6 if you're across the border in England. Had nothing to do with the science after that.
No.
And I think it also affected the psychology of government.
Right.
I think they had absolute power, and we know what comes with absolute power, don't we?
We do.
Absolute corruption.
And if they'd been good, honest, decent people, this would have been fine. Well, not fine necessarily, but it would have been like a war. It would have been, we are on the same side. But they were taking
it together.
But we never were, because he was having a party and the rest of them were filling their pockets.
And the rest, that's just what we know.
If only there had been people screaming at you for 3 years.
No, I love the point
that this was what was happening.
If only the good people had absolute power, everything would be fine.
Yep, if only Labour had been in charge, we would have had harsher restrictions.
If I was the dictator, socialism would have worked.
I know, it's just the sheer...
I'm actually dealing with a child.
The sheer cheek of it. This is one of the most outrageously shocking, awful things that I've ever seen, and I'm laughing. Ridiculous. Pour one out for all of the normal working people out there who lost their jobs or were personally insulted by James O'Brien, because that's what he does. He goes on his show, he takes calls from normal people, which are always screened to make sure that only the most uninformed people get through, so that James O'Brien can always feel like a big brain box. And he personally insulted them on his LBC show for expressing the same opinions 3 years ago. Pour one out for those folks, because really, these people are scum, and they think that you're scum, and they hate you, and are not afraid to show it.
If you appreciated that segment from the podcast of the Lotus Eaters, you can go to lotuseaters.com to get access to all the premium content that's on the site, such as the Contemplation series, this episode on how corporations squeeze money out of people. If you'd like to find out what else is being put out, you can follow on Getter at lotuseaters_com on Getter. Thank you and goodbye.